The following program will make you want to grow things and experience new and wonderful dreams about your plants, garden, and garden design. Listener participation is always strongly advised. Good evening and welcome to Down the Garden Path with your hosts, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101. To get on board in the Toronto GTA area, dial 905-725-1907. Toll free in North America, 1-866-905-7325. Send us an email right now. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, right to your hosts of Down the Garden Path, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to this episode of Down the Garden Path, where each week we discuss down-to-earth tips and advice for your plants, gardens, and landscapes. As landscape designers and gardeners, we think it is important. We think it is important and possible to have great gardens that are low maintenance, and we want to help you make it happen. I'm Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and owner of Down to Earth Landscape Design for the past 11 years. It is currently a design-only business here east of the GTA. With me is my co-host Matthew Dressing. Welcome, Matthew.
Hello, Joanne. Welcome, everyone. I am Matthew Dressing, horticulturist and landscape designer and owner of Natural Affinity Designs. Natural Affinity Designs is a landscape design and garden maintenance firm servicing Toronto and the Eastern GTA. Joanne and I enjoy doing Down the Garden Path each week, bringing you interesting, relevant, and helpful topics to help you achieve a great garden. We learn right along with you from each other, from our research, and from the guests that join us here on the show. As always, we welcome your questions via social media and email here at instudio101@gmail.com.
That's right, and we want to thank you always for joining us here live on Down the Garden Path. But also remember that we are available as a podcast as well. So please subscribe to Down the Garden Path podcast on your favorite podcast app, and you will get instant updates when new episodes go live. So we like to thank you for joining us regardless of how you listen to our show.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
So tonight's show. What is tonight's show? And it's the big question I'm sure we're always asked.
Well, now that people are finally
always
in their gardens, they can start thinking about it, right?
That's very true.
That's true. Gardening time is taking its sweet time this season. I don't know where everybody is, but here in the GTA, it has definitely taken its time.
And is it still coming?
It's still coming. Sure. I know. You're still wearing a hoodie.
I am.
And it's June.
It's so cool out today.
Yes.
Speaking of cool, we're talking about the shade.
That's right.
So just the thought of it sometimes makes gardeners cringe, and images of hostas racing through their mind. But believe it or not, it's easy to have a beautiful, colorful shade garden with more than just hostas. So today we're going to shed some light on the issue of shade gardening.
Ooh, good pun there.
And share some interesting shade plants to brighten the dark recesses of your yard. So if you have a shade question, maybe you have a tough area in your yard, you want to join the conversation, again, don't forget, write us here at instudio101@gmail.com and let us help you. And as always, reach us anytime. Joanne at down2earth.ca and Matthew at naturalaffinitydesigns.ca.
Excellent. That's right. And if you have a plant you love, a shade plant that you love that you want to share with everybody, then we'd love to hear about it too.
Yeah. Or maybe you have something funky and cool that's normally like a sun plant that you've somehow gotten in the shade. That something fun and different.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about it. But in the meantime, we'll get to that. But in the meantime, what is happening at the garden center?
Yeah. Speaking of in the gardens.
Yes.
You know what? The garden center is slow but steady.
Yes.
Slow but steady. Still cool. Lots and lots of plants to pick from. Just kind of like we talk about designers and installers being behind. The season for us has kind of been behind. So it really wasn't all on the May 2-4 weekend. Yeah. It's just constantly being stretched out weekend after weekend. So we're starting to hit our stride now, and it's kind of almost back to normal with plant selection and things.
Okay.
But still lots to pick from and still lots to enjoy. So
excellent. I know I finally got my plants from your garden center for my front containers. So I kicked in to raise that budget. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I still have 2 containers to do for my sister too, but but there's still lots out there. So.
Yeah, there definitely is. So that's good. And the upside is that the cooler temperatures and have made the because usually the challenge this time of year is keeping everything alive, right? Yeah. For my days working at the garden center, and because you need to water it and try to sell it fast, and so watering hasn't been as crucial.
No, yeah, you're right, and it's just starting to show up outside in the nursery. It's just starting, the wind and the bursts of rain here and there and the warmth that's starting. So
good.
Yeah, so things are good there too.
Excellent.
So you've made some containers for your front. What else is going on in your garden?
I have to say, aside from the weeds, so the rain, all my exposed earth that I still haven't finished planting yet is, very happily getting covered with weeds. Yeah. But aside from that, the garden is looking lush. My variegated irises are up, looking amazing. My poppies are up, and my tree peony. My other peony, so the peonies are behind. I don't know how this past weekend was the Oshawa Peony Festival, and I don't know, was anything blooming?
Yeah, no, and when I didn't get to go on the day, but just a couple days before I went, and there was a quarter of them were maybe open, and the buds were still tight and small in a lot of them. So it was,
So the progress is slow, but the anything leafing out in green, and my Japanese maples are looking good. My viburnum is happy. So everything is looking good.
Have you had any issues with viburnum leaf beetle this year?
I have the summer snowflake. I don't have the I don't know what's the you would know the botanical name of the difference. I don't usually do this. I know everybody loves that fragrant viburnum, but which is very fragrant and amazing, but so drawn to insects. Where the summer snowflake, that's the plicatum, right?
Yeah, I think it is that.
One. Is very insect tolerant.
Yeah, for sure.
Kilimanjaro, I started using that one as well. Kilimanjaro is a bit narrower viburnum.
Cool.
And a few designs, and so no insect damage there, so that's good.
We're being inundated at the garden center.
Yes.
So we've already got a listener question.
That's right, someone's jumping on the shade bandwagon, so that's good. So I'm excited to talk about shade, because I think it is, I think as we're plant people, so we kind of have those solutions kind of, figured out, but yet other people that really struggle with that. So, so we're hoping to help you with, add some, like you said, some light in your shade garden. So our first question.
Yeah, Mike writes in. Hi, Joanne and Matthew. I live in Toronto, and my yard, due to trees, is partial sun, but I want to grow tomatoes and peppers. Any advice? P.S. If I use pots, how big do they need to be? Thank you for any advice, Mike. No problem, Mike. Thanks for writing in. Tomatoes and peppers, and true about most fruiting things, full as much sun as they can get, because that fruit takes a lot of energy, and those flowers take a lot of energy to grow and be created. So if you can find pots, exactly what I was thinking, because we kind of jumped over, but my balcony, I have to grow everything in big pots. So as big as you can manage, kind of pick a spot in the most sun in your yard if possible. I have, I want to say 20 gallon. I think it's a 20 or 25 gallon nursery pot out on my balcony, and it gets sun from 7 a.m. to 2:33.
Okay.
And I grow lots of tomatoes, and I've got potatoes in them this year, which are coming along well. So if you can find the hottest, brightest spot in your garden, that is the best.
6 hours, right?
Yeah,
6 hours is the minimum. So it's not,
right.
So Mike, it doesn't have to be 12 hours of sun.
No.
the afternoon sun is better, but if you can, I think 6 hours, if there's some corners in your garden where you can put the pots, that gets at least 6 hours. And then like you're successful with the morning sun, right? That's 7:30 till 2:30.
Yeah.
So that is good. So yeah, and I would say the tomatoes certainly need to be in a good sized pot.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing full size tomatoes, but even cherry tomatoes, I've tried them in too small of a container and they just get huge.
Yeah.
The peppers, we've been successful actually in large window boxes. Like I can do 3 pepper plants so that could be an option too, Mike, because you can kind of tuck that up against a fence, like it's long and narrow, so not block a walkway or something like that. So we've been successful. We've done jalapeno peppers, really successful with those in containers. But peppers are tough because they do need a lot of sun and a lot of heat, like nighttime temperatures. So I think all our pepper plants are getting off to a really slow start because it's still been cooler. Even tonight, they're saying it's down to 15. Like it's not going to be a warm night.
No.
So not the peppers. That slows them down big time.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So hope that helps, Mike. Hope you can find a few spots. And lettuce, so you can grow lettuce in less light.
Yes.
Right? So more shady part sun spots, you can do lettuce and any of the leafy greens, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can still get something out of those spots, which is great. Yeah. Yeah. So would you consider, so your balcony is not really shade because you get the morning sun.
Yeah, you know what? And I started off thinking I'm east facing. The sun comes only for so long, so I started with shade plants.
Okay.
And I tend to grow some veggies, but then I was growing in the beginning a lot more shade annuals, and they were just being roasted to death. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's more of a partial shade.
Yeah.
So I try that. Nope, it's still actually more of a full sun, the amount of light and the heat, and it's just that little bit that I go over on noon. And again, of course, my shade kind of travels from the north end to the south end.
Right. And to remind everyone, you're on a balcony. So also I think the heat from the balcony, like, don't you think,
just
from the building?
The building,
so it's not necessarily
absorbing
sunshine, but I think it's some heat.
Right. And the reflected
for annuals.
Light.
Like I think perennials and shrubs would, maybe not be so
the word
susceptible. There you go.
Yeah.
Whew, couldn't think of that word. But definitely annuals, I think, are more sensitive to that heat, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I've gone full sun annuals where I can.
Oh, good. And you're welcome, Mike. Thank you for listening. As always, thank you. And for asking us a question, too. So that's good.
That's right.
Yeah.
So if you have a question, don't be afraid to ask in studio101@gmail.com.
So you had said, defining shade, because not everybody's shade is created equal.
Right.
Right? Sometimes it's caused by trees. Sometimes it's just the north, the position of the house in the garden.
Right. And sometimes the trees aren't, like they're not very dense trees. Different trees have a different density in their canopy. So sometimes it's like if you're under a locust, it's a bright but dappled shade. Might not be direct sun, but, some streams come through. Or if you have a big Norway maple, or a couple of those close together, they can be a much darker, deeper shade. So it is tough to define what exactly shade is. And a lot of people ask that in the garden center too. Well, it says like part sun or part shade. Like, are those the same thing? And yes, they're just part sun and part shade are the same thing. But how much light is that? So there are some general rough rules, like 4 hours of consecutive sunlight or less, you generally have a shade spot.
Okay.
If you're in the 4 to 6 and it's bright and it's dappled, you're kind of in that partial shade. And then 6+, you've pretty much got like a full sun or that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's good for everybody to know.
Right, exactly. Right? So those are some general guidelines. And then just kind of like I experienced on my balcony, test things in your garden. Like you were saying, like the reflected heat, the reflected light from my windows, lighter colored surfaces, right? Where white or lighter colors will reflect light, because that's what black is, right? It's the absorption of all those colors. And you reflect that out. So little things like that can play with your shade and your sun and how much light you actually get in that area. So just little things to kind of consider it. So it can be tough to measure, and everyone's got it differently. You can get little light meters that'll tell you, but it's better just trial and error. Go out and plant something. Yeah. And if it's too dark, move it. Or too bright, move it darker.
Yes, yeah. And sometimes I think, especially if you're new to gardening, look at what your neighbor's growing. Like if they've got, if you guys share a front lawn and you have the same light conditions, sometimes that you can do a little cheat, right? And like, okay, there are hostas or not that we're going to focus on hostas tonight, but, they are growing, impatiens in their front garden. Sun impatiens in their front garden, or they're growing geraniums and they're flowering. So, okay, I can possibly grow those too, right? So,
exactly.
Yeah. So we joked about, because usually when everybody talks about shade, just to explain our whole, we have nothing against the hosta, and we will certainly one of these days do a whole show on hostas. I know we have lots of people that love to, I'm sure Dawn from Gardens Plus would love to come back and talk about hostas. But we just think that that's, an easy out, and sometimes people already have hostas and they just want to know, they want to look for something else. So that's why we want to focus on what else than hostas to add to your garden.
That's it. Shade beyond the hosta.
Beyond the hosta. That's right. Shade beyond the hosta.
So, shade we find also tends to get a bad reputation. It's shade. Oh, I can't plant anything there. And as you just said, we're going to show and we're going to talk about a lot of different neat plants that give you lots of seasonal interest and some color and texture. They're great in plants. It's not that plants don't like to grow in the shade. It's just that there's someone already there creating the shade, and we like to plant under trees, right?
Right.
The grass dies out because that's a full sun plant, and there's fewer weeds, but it becomes sparse. But it's because we're planting under trees.
Right.
So shade gets that bad reputation as I can't do anything there.
Yes.
And it's no, there's lots to do there, but you've got a big tree that you're planting under there. And trees are massive. It takes a lot of water and nutrients to support that big tree.
Right.
So starting if you're designing a shade area, know that you're going to have a tree there and plant slowly and accordingly.
Right.
As you build into that space. If you have a massive 40-year-old maple there, you're going to have 40 years worth of roots that are already existing in that soil, and you're basically going to chop out a tiny little space for a little plant to go in. And the maple's roots are smart. They can detect gravity. They know that there's new air and moisture in that space, and they're going to go investigate and grow in. Because pruning roots is like pruning a plant. It's going to create growth. So we try to compete underneath trees, and the trees tend to win on the side. So shade, there's lots to do, and we're going to talk about that. But if you've got big trees, don't be discouraged. We've got some tips and tricks for that too. But that tends to be the big thing. Now,
You're right. Yeah, so it's not really the light conditions that are holding back the plants, but it's the fact that you're trying to plant under a tree.
You've got enough light for some cool stuff.
Yes.
But there's someone else already there.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Pedro Martin writes in, hey, love you guys. No shade questions this evening. But is it okay to put down a weed and feed fertilizer on my lawn now?
It depends where you're calling from or you're emailing from, because there's no weed and feed available in Canada. Right? So if you have it available,
go for it.
Yeah, I guess go for it. Yeah.
But if you're north of the border, Pedro, what you're going to find is the weed and feeds are just corn gluten. So it's a pre-emergent. So you can put it down in open soil areas.
Yeah.
It'll prevent anything from growing at any time when the corn gluten gets absorbed. So I say, if you've got open soil, you don't like mulch, for example, you can put it down. It won't affect the established perennials or anything.
But it's not going to kill your existing weeds that are in your garden, like the traditional weed and feed did.
Exactly. Yeah. Or if your lawn's going to go dormant because you go away for vacation for 3 weeks. You're in Toronto.
Yes.
So Pedro, so Toronto, you're going to find it's just corn gluten.
Yes. Or you're just putting fertilizer down. There's no, your weed is kind of a secondary, either a spray. You can buy what's the spray called? The iron, the spray.
The Weed Be Gone?
Yes. Weed Be Gone. Yes. So it would be kind of a two-step thing in apply fertilizer for encouraging your grass to grow, and then treat the weeds by hand, unfortunately.
Because you're just going to suppress them. Anything established will not do anything.
Yes. Yeah. So hope that helps, Pedro. Thank you for the message. So back to shade.
Right. So shade gets that bad reputation from just competition with tree roots. But there's a lot of benefits to shade. Foliage doesn't burn. Plants will sunburn like we do. And we can see that when we bring our tropicals out. They start to bleach or they get that transparent surface. Flower colors, they tend to be more intense. The sun isn't constantly wearing away the color or the surface of the flower. So you can get a bright pop. And in the shade, just the contrast of the color in a lower light can help as well. Less watering needed because there's not as much sun working on the soil, right? Or even the plants, the environmental stresses, the sun causing the plants. Like we're out in the sun, right? We drink more water. But if we're in the air-conditioned area, we don't drink as much water.
Yeah.
Same thing kind of in the shade. The water is used differently and evaporates slower as well. Like we were just saying, a reduced number of weeds. Most weeds are sun plants.
Right.
So they're going to be few and far between. Not that there's not some really good weeds that can get in there. Just some less routine maintenance. There's not as much getting in there. You don't have to water as much. You don't have to fertilize as much. You don't have to go in there and pick all the weeds as much. You don't have to go in there and water as much. So your gardening routine will be reduced a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're going to say, there's some pretty neat and interesting plants that we're both going to geek out about shortly.
That's right.
And then, there's certain styles of gardens as well, like Japanese gardens or Oriental style gardens that are actually enhanced by the different light levels and the lower light levels.
Right. And almost more foliage, right? Of interesting textures and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Enhances some textures and foliages and different things like that. So there's lots of benefits to the shades as well, as difficult as we may or may not find it. So some tips.
Yes.
For some gardening in the shades.
Okay. I'm
So-
just doing. Oh, okay. So soil enhancement. So were you thinking underneath? Well, that's one of the tips that you have written down. Soil enhancement. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So it's just easy. Just things grow slower.
Mm-hmm.
So you can add, you like your mulches or your composts and things like that. Those soil enhancements tends to last a little longer. So again, you're not in there doing all that maintenance. You've also got the nearby trees and leaves. So as they fall and they get caught in your shade garden, they can decompose if they're smaller leaves, but they'll also protect the soil as well. So they'll protect overwintering perennials and things that are maybe half hardy. Some ground ivies, for example. The annual ones that you see that you buy for, just to spill over the edge of your pot.
Right.
Most of them are like a zone 6. So with some leaf color or coverage in the Toronto area, for example, like we're here with Pedro, some good leaf coverage or some debris will actually overwinter them.
Okay.
If we get some leaves and some snow cover, they'll actually fare fairly well. And then so that was also just under the mulch, and we were talking. You presented at the Oshawa Garden Club.
Yes, last Monday.
Right, and you had an interesting part in your slide presentation, and I forget who it was. Was it the University of Ohio? They were doing a study on
Mulch.
mulches.
Yes,
right.
that didn't go over well with the group, did it? I really, people
They
love
didn't.
it did not, but that, it's fine. I think, so we basically, I was talking about low maintenance gardening, that little segment on low maintenance and the importance of mulch to help the garden be low maintenance, but that we're using our reliance on the dyed mulches.
Yeah.
Is really been studied at the University of Ohio, I think it was,
I
right?
thought it was Ohio.
Yeah. And that really the dyed wood is not really breaking down and adding those nutrients to the soil. That the wood that is, the manufacturers are using that is, readily accepting the dye. And it's common sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Because I was thinking, I like the black mulch.
Yes.
And it looks really good. And I had it in our garden one year.
Yes.
And it lasted a couple of years. You replace it and everything, but it looks so beautiful, right?
It does.
And I was contemplating getting it again,
Yes.
and now I'm having second thoughts. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they're just saying that, the natural mulches come, they start out pretty dark as well. So I think switching to more of the natural, I guess the cedar is going to be more brown than black. The composted pine comes pretty dark. I've seen that, but really the black dyed stuff, like I said, they're more like it's shredded pallets, it's shredded decking material. It's not really that organic material that we're wanting to add to our gardens. So really, mulch cover is to help retain the moisture, help to keep the weeds down. But we know it's going to break down, and we want when it breaks down, we want it to be improving, the quality of the gardens.
Yeah.
And if it's adding, because some of those woods could have arsenic and some other chemicals in them.
Right.
So really now we're like,
But if I did that, you wouldn't yell at me when you came by?
no. I
Okay.
mean, that's you're free to do what you like. We're just here with the information.
No,
right?
and that's why I say I try to take your advice on everything.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm just, I just wanted to add some class a little bit. And I've seen some people around the neighborhood that have black, and it looks so classy.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it does look good.
But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. And this, I think I was especially targeting the people that love the red, which is also not a fan of, unfortunately, even before I knew about this. But so that's something, maybe, I don't know if it's available like dyed cedar mulch or, but it's just something to think about. That's all. Okay.
Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So we have another question.
We do. Ray writes in. Hi, Joanne and Matthew. Thank you very much for taking my email question. Well, you're welcome, Ray. We always enjoy our email questions. And thank you for writing it in. Earlier, you talked a bit about growing veggies, etc. Should I cover my plants with netting or something else due to rabbits, squirrels, and other critters in my yards? My neighbor's plants always get eaten. Thank you.
That's always the trick.
It is always the trick. And in the garden center, I mean, yes, you can always find like,
chicken wire.
Thank you.
Chicken wire?
I can see it. And
I know. I'm like you with your hands again.
Yeah. She reads my language. The chicken wire, yeah. So you can always get stakes and chicken wire and build gates and fences. You can get plastic or wire, chicken wire and bird netting and things like that.
Yep. You can also have some of those raised garden beds, right? You can buy the kits to make it more raised up off the ground.
Yeah.
Would that help with critters?
Yeah. Squirrels and chipmunks, if they're really hungry and they can see it, I mean, we know they jump and they travel.
Yeah. Are they really eating the vegetable, or are they just trying to hide their stuff in, like they're wrecking the plants?
Yeah. And that's a good question too. But Ray is saying that they are getting eaten. But yeah, the chipmunks and the blue jays and the squirrels, they tend to like grab stuff, run away, and hide.
Right.
But the rabbits for sure will be
be eating.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So you can do that. The other thing out there that people are having great success with is the hen manure.
Ah, really?
Right. Yes, and they hate the hen manure, especially the rabbits. It's something about the smell that's in it.
Okay.
That they repel.
And it comes in like a little milk carton. It looks like, right? It's a little milk carton, right? Of hen manure. They come out in little pellets.
You got it. Lasts 20 to 30 days. It breaks down. Don't listen to any of the instructions. Just basically, if you have a plant, don't put it just around the base of the plant. Put it in like a 2-foot barrier around where you don't want them to be.
Oh, okay.
And they just don't work it into the soil. Just leave it right on top.
Okay.
The scent evaporates and they hate it. And I'm sure Ray is thinking, oh wait, does it really stink? Will I smell it in my house or my?
Yes.
And no. When you open it, you will because it's concentrated. But as it breaks down, their heightened sense of smell, it'll repel them.
Right.
And do that for sure. So.
And if you do want to, I know anything that is furry. So if you have an open area and you want to, you don't want to do the netting thing, but you want to plant, you could look for like lamb's ears or lavender even that's got scented, like anything that has a scent or a texture to it.
Right.
Rabbits don't like. So lamb's ear, it's a perennial. It's not one of my favorites, but it's got actually, like you think of lamb's ears, right? It's a furry leaf.
Yeah.
Not a really. It's a silver foliage, not a huge distinct flower necessarily, but it could work in kind of deterring things. They don't want to break down. So that could be another option. But I think that the hen manure is a great thing to start with.
Yeah, great start. It's readily available. It's all approved for organic culture. It builds the soil, it feeds the plants, etc., etc.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you for your question, Ray.
Yeah.
So tonight, if you're just turning in, we are talking about shade plants beyond the hosta. Yeah, so that's what we're talking about today. And we can want to do a commercial break, or did you? I know. I'm so good at that segue, Barry. I'm just so good at it.
Yeah.
So when we come right back, we will get back to hostas or shade plants. Oh my goodness! And so if any listeners want to write us in any more questions about their shade garden, we'd love to hear it. And we'll be right back here Down the Garden Path on Reality Radio 101.
Relax by the Bay B&B offers the perfect holiday for the adventurous traveler or those who just want to escape from their busy lifestyle and rest. Book your comfortable stay in historic Margarettsville, Nova Scotia by calling 902-982-2302 and find panoramic views of the Bay of Fundy while enjoying the warm hospitality of Heber's Baked Goods and April's breathtaking watercolor paintings. Stay for a week or a weekend in your own suite, complete with private bath. Call 902-982-2302 2302 to book your stay now. Relax by the Bay BNB.com. Arrive as guests and leave as friends. Welcome back to Down the Garden Path with your hosts Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101. To get on board, send us an email. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, right back to your hosts of Down the Garden Path, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back. You are listening to Down the Garden Path here on Reality Radio 101. Thanks for tuning in and listening and joining us this Monday evening. Just as Gary said, we're talking shade, and it's in studio101@gmail.com. Joanne and I always love to hear from our listeners. Say hi, where you're from, ask a question. We love to talk to you.
That's right.
So we are talking shade plants, and we were talking just tips about gardening, and we were just talking over the commercial break. We were just looking at the notes and stuff, and I had found a tip where when you're planting underneath a tree or an area, when you dig something, you plant something, you're going to do it just as deep as the soil is in the pot, and usually like twice as wide.
Right.
But this tip, some people were saying that they had found experience if you go wider than the pot, so not twice as wide, go like 3 or 4 times as wide, and just use some like recycled newspaper, and you put it down, put a couple layers of it down. The newspaper will biodegrade, but as those young new formed tree roots kind of work in, they hit the paper and it stalls them a bit. They have to kind of work their way through the folds, or it has it decomposed enough that they can just kind of go through
shredded newspaper.
Right, no, just kind of layers of newspapers just along the outer wall.
Okay.
And then backfill like normal, and it just kind of slows them taking over that plant space again.
That's an interesting thing to try.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've never tried it that way. I've never dug like that. But I'm definitely going to try now.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So, and see how it goes. It just kind of gives them that time to establish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then don't forget watering. We're big champions of watering deeply and properly and getting everything deep water. So, just always make sure, give it that water. You want to water that bottom of that pot that you're going to be watering in the shade, that newly planted area. It tends to be or can be a drier shade depending on what kind of shade you have. So just make sure you're hitting the bottom of that pot. You want to always water that 8 to 12 inches down and give it a good deep feeding. The roots will detect that new water in that new soil and start to spread out into that. So if you're not sure if you're watering enough, test yourself. Go out there with your trowel, water what you think you need to water. Go out about half an hour later and dig down 8 inches. And see how much water is actually down in that root zone at 8 inches, just gently beside that newly dug hole, and see if you've gotten down there. And if not, then you need to water just a little bit more.
That's right. And I think things like soaker hoses, right? Soaker hoses go a long way. I know if you listened last season, I couldn't talk enough good things about the tree gator. And I did certainly use it around my trees, but then I would open it up and put it in some strategic spots where I knew the trees didn't necessarily need the water, but the shade plants under my trees did. And it's just it's just a bag that you've seen them. They zip around a tree, but they've got little teeny tiny holes, and it holds like 7 gallons of water. And then it'll take, 20 hours to kind of leach out quickly or slowly, which would get, really help. So that's something. So there are some strategies that are low. I mean, I know our key focus is always low maintenance. We know you don't want to be out there with a watering can every day, every other day, every morning, that kind of thing. So there are some key strategies, things like, soaker hoses. You can put the soaker hose on a timer as well, have it run during dinner, and, that kind of thing. So there's some good strategies with these tips, and those work with all weather, regardless of the shade, right?
Oh yeah, you can do all of that in the sun gardens as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we're almost at the halfway point of the show. So let's talk about some plants. So perennials. Do you want to start with some perennials?
Yes. Let's start with some perennials.
Okay.
We won't even mention the H word.
Yeah.
Japanese forest grass.
Mhm.
I quite enjoy Japanese forest grass.
I do too.
All gold Japanese forest grass, the Hakanakloa macro aurea. Aureola, I'm going to say it wrong.
Yes.
But that one, there's actually, we order up as much as we can when we can get it. There is a shortage of this plant being
Really?
grown. It is this popular.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're going out there and you're looking for the all gold Japanese forest grass, that's just the pure gold.
There is a striped one too.
There's a couple different striped ones.
Yes.
And there's some really neat ones. Nicholas, and I think there's another one, Firecracker, or it's a fire something. It's newer.
Yeah, and it's so there. Even though it's an ornamental grass, it's low and kind of cascading, so it's not a tall ornamental grass, and it's got that lovely chartreuse or yellow gold color.
Yeah.
So it's certainly a pop in. We said about letting the light into the shade garden, so it's really a nice pop.
Yeah, it'll set off those darker colors.
Yes.
That don't really show up very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Nicholas and that fire one, they actually go a nice blood red in the fall.
Oh, okay.
They kind of get like a little half burning bush kind of effect going on.
Okay.
So they're neat just to add some fall color.
Yes.
Because we like plants that do 2 or 3 things.
Yeah, definitely. So a couple of the ones on my list that I'm growing under 2 Crimson Kings. So not a lot of sun and not a lot of attention either for me either. So Brennera and Lungwort, they're often confused. They both have interesting foliage. They're not often confused, but they both have like periwinkle flowers. And but the foliage, even when the flowers, they tend to both flower periwinkle in the spring, and then they have really interesting kind of variegated green and white and silver kind of foliage. So even when it's done flowering, again, we love our plants that do one thing, or one plant that does 2 things.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, and when we talked about doing this show, I kind of went through that garden that I've pretty much neglected, and was like, okay, what's doing well without this, any work for me? And those 2 were like, wow, they've really come along. So I think they do grow slower. The deeper the shade, the slower they grow.
For sure.
But they certainly are doing fine.
Yeah.
And I have them planted pretty tight to the base of the trees, like kind of, like you said, the roots, it's digging around till you find there's no root and you can actually get some soil, right? So those are a couple of my favorites.
Lungwort's on my list as well. I just love the silvers and the speckles and how the flowers will come out and they'll change from pink and blue.
Yes.
They're just absolutely amazing. They're great. But yeah, they get kind of. Yeah, I get people asking in the garden center, is this a hosta?
You're right.
No.
Yes. And I think people are put off by the name lungwort too. It's kind of a weird name.
Yeah, well, in the pulmonaria genus, they were actually used in like herbal medicines to help respiratory ailments.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a medicinal value to it.
Medicinal ones.
Yes. As a ground cover, our next one is pretty good.
Ajuga.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love Burgundy Glow.
Okay.
Ajuga. It's got the whites mixed in with some burgundy browns, and then that dark,
right,
like burgundy brown real color. It's almost in black in some spots, and great. It's anywhere from that 2 to 6 inches, depending on how old and dense that mat is. It tends to be fairly low and steppable, and then it comes out in that mid to late spring with the tall blue spires
right,
that kind of dot and cascade.
It's pretty slow, so you definitely need to, if you really want it to be a ground cover, then I would overplant. I've always done it where I've underplanted. Even in my garden right now, I think I have 3 plants, which is not doing anything. So really, I would buy a flat of it, buy a dozen or more, and really kind of plant them, because it takes a little while. They kind of grow little offshoots, and then they start a new plant, and that type of thing. So it's a slow growth, but once it's established, it does look nice.
It's beautiful, yeah. Mm-hmm. It can take a little bit of sun as well, and a lot of people have found that in the sunnier spots where it's kind of flowed in, it will start to go out onto the edge of the lawn. And start to attack in the sunnier spots.
Okay.
So just watch a higher sunnier spot where it grows a little quicker.
Yeah.
And it goes over the edge of that bed. But
okay.
There's lots of different ones of those too. Mm-hmm. Great ground covers, chocolate chip, super cute little rounded leaves. Again, the nice blue flowers. They're very chocolate chip like actual color.
Yeah, and it's rare to have something in the shade that is burgundy like that, don't you think?
Yeah,
it's got a bit
it's
of a burgundy tinge to it. So it's a nice
tough.
texture to mix in. Like if you picture it with the Japanese forest grass and the silver and white and green of the Brennera, already you've got lots of color with just foliage, right?
Yeah, hasn't even
and then
flowered yet.
and then you throw in the flower of those too. So so that's a good choice for sure.
Another one that I quite enjoy, and I think it was on your list too, the snake root.
Yes.
The snake root,
Yep.
bane, simisafuga, whatever you want to call it.
Yep. Also has burgundy foliage, some varieties, right?
Yeah, some varieties do have that nice burgundy foliage. I love the big leaves. They're almost as big as your hands on some varieties. They're very cut-like and almost lace-like. They're fairly big, so it's not a very fine lace, but it's very reminiscent of a Japanese maple leaf, I find. Usually grows about 2 feet tall to about 2 to 3 feet wide. A slower grower again, but it'll reward you in the fall with some tall, long spikes of white flowers that usually have like a citrus or a jasmine scent to them, depending on which one you get.
And I would say, I think this is a great plant, and I've planted it, but I made the mistake of planting one. So
yes.
I think it is because it's slow growing, and but I've seen it in like doing garden tours and stuff, and it's always a huge statement plant.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is they've planted, 3 or 5 of them. So I think it's one where you can really make a statement in a shade garden, but you can't just start with one. I'm looking at my sad little one like poking out and underneath my hydrangeas in between my hedge, and I'm like, it really isn't much, So I'm regretting that. So that's my 2 cents is invest in getting a few plants, and then I guarantee you it will really be a showstopper in the garden, in your shade garden. I really do.
Excellent tip.
Yeah.
Excellent tip.
So we've got another question here from Sean.
Yeah, Sean writes in, "Hi, Joanne and Matthew. As usual, fantastic radio show this evening."
Thank you, Sean.
Long-time listener here, and I can honestly say that due to your yearly free advice, my garden looks absolutely fantastic. Thank you for that.
Oh, so good to hear.
That's fantastic to hear. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, we always love
this.
You
Is
guys
a good
being
one.
success.
I'm on your team with this one, Sean. Go
I
ahead.
haven't even read it.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Could you please remind your listening audience to please, and this is in caps, water their trees at the curb?
Yes, your city trees, everybody.
Yes, even though most properties at that location are owned by municipalities, it is our responsibility to water those trees and foliage. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, we've talked
100%.
about it. Shauna, you've probably heard me talk about my tree gator. I've taken it to my neighbors' trees across the street and stuff. Especially we had newly planted trees just after the ice storm and ash trees and whatever. But yeah, there's a couple neighbors where I couldn't get to, and they've just sat. And the tree coverage it benefits all of us. It benefits our home values. Walking into it, like driving into a neighborhood with mature trees. And, it helps cool your house. We could go on and on about all the reasons to do it. And I think it's really, really important. Your taxpayers, even though that's technically the city's trees, it's your tax dollars that are paying for them.
Pay for it.
And you're paying for the replacement. You're paying for the damage that they do when they fall or they have to be cared for or, removed and replanted and all of that work. So please, when you're watering your regular trees, I know I'm on a bandwagon. Sean, you started something. Please do that. I will say, Sean, though, the foliage doesn't necessarily need to be watered. I know I love seeing those people standing out there watering the tops of their trees. Really, it's, think about the ring, look at the tree line, right? Or the edge of the drip line of where the leaves are. Sometimes, even watering your front lawn is watering the tree. You don't have to water the trunk. You don't have to water right at the base of the tree if they're mature. You can water a little ways away. But please, especially in those hot summer months, consider your trees.
Yeah, they're alive too.
That's right.
A living addition.
Yeah. So
thank
back
you,
to
Sean.
shade. Yeah, thank you,
For
Sean.
sure.
Back to hope that was a good public service announcement. So another one that's my favorite is the Solomon seal, and I have both. I have the Solomon seal and the variegated Solomon seal in my garden, and this is a popular one. If you ever do a garden plant sales in the spring, like horticultural, this is a popular one because it's not invasive, but it definitely forms a good clump in a couple of years, and people often do divide it and want to share it, and it's a really cool one. So It really adds a really neat texture. And it's not popular to have shade plants that are necessarily tall. You know, Simicifugio is one, or Snake Root was one, but Solomon Seal is another one. So definitely a popular one.
Yes, I love the arching stems and how the little white flowers hang underneath them.
Yeah, definitely. And even when the flower's done, the plant, it doesn't really die back, does it? It stays all summer.
Yeah, it just kind of does its thing. And
so it's definitely worth it, for sure. So we do have some vines. Sometimes people have, shady spots on a fence or a trellis, right? So some porcelain berry or kiwi vine are things to consider. We won't get kiwis, but that's okay. We just want the vine. Yeah. And you put down Virginia creeper on the list, and I didn't realize that actually grew in the shade. So, but it's such a tough vine that it's going to grow anywhere.
Crazy vine. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had it on growing up in between on the northeast side in between two houses. And the thing
virtually no light, right? Probably.
Yeah. Like it got morning sun maybe, and from 10:30 to noon as the sun kind of jumped between the two houses.
Okay.
And it was volunteered by a bird, grew between the driveway and the side of the brick house, and by year 2 it was at the top of the second story with 3 solid arms. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. But
okay, so that's good to know. So there's some vines for people beyond the hosta for their shade garden. And Virginia creeper can be used as a ground cover, but it will climb like anything it gets to, right? So it will climb trees and fences and things like that. So
yes.
So I don't know if if you're desperate, but I think it's best left for something climbing.
Still going on with the perennials. One of my favorite ones, another fall blooming shade, toad lily. Tricurtus. I love it. It's almost like orchid-like leaf structure and stem structure. And then in the fall, it comes out with long arching stems of these unusual upturned
kind of orchid-like too, right?
Yeah, it's very orchid-like.
Yeah.
Tinier
though.
They're smaller. Yeah, they're maybe the size of a nickel. And then the stem just fills itself with 10 to 30 of these things, and they're blues and purples and whites, and gilt edge is probably my favorite variety because it's got that nice creamy yellow edge that's irregular along the edge. So even when it's not in bloom because we got to wait till the fall,
right?
You still have some sort of visual interest with the plant, not only its structure but a little bit of color in there as well.
Excellent. So another one that is a good ground cover is lamium. That's a popular one with kind of a green and white and even silverish kind of foliage, and the flowers go from white to pink to I've even seen some yellow. Right? Is there a yellow version out there? Excellent.
Yeah. There's some red dragons, which are getting really into the deeper pink magenta kind of range, and greenway is a variety or cultivar that is like a solid yellow leaf with some white and green markings on it. So kind of like the opposite. So you get another, again, like the Japanese bloodgrass, the forest grass.
Right.
You kind of get that pop of yellow, something low that you can tuck around.
Yeah, definitely. It can get out of hand, but it's easier to control, I think.
Oh, super easy. She's you can, like the ajuga, she kind of sets as she goes. If she's looking ratty in the summer, just
cut it back.
Literally just mow it to the ground, within a quarter inch of herself, and she'll just reward you with new leaves.
Excellent. Now you have northern sea oats on the so as far as an ornamental grass. So I didn't realize that it would grow in the shade.
Yeah, she's fairly shade tolerant.
Excellent.
She does prefer more of a full sun to partial shade. But when in a pinch, she tends to be that one very bamboo-like stems, a nice rusty red color in the fall. Unusual flower heads, upright arching vase shape. But yeah, she kind of gives you that 3 to 4 feet eventually in a shade. So
that's nice.
A lot of people, they love their grasses for just because they're grasses, they're pretty cool, or privacy or whatever reason. But that one will take some good shade for sure.
Excellent. So sometimes people have some bigger areas of shade, and so they might require something more than perennials. So we have got some shrub ideas. There's too many SHs in that sentence. Shrubs for shade. So some of the most common ones, rhododendrons, azaleas, people know about. Certain Japanese maples will grow in less light, right? And offer you, depending on the size of them, that type of thing. Annabelle hydrangea is also a popular one. It certainly does need the water, the moisture, but it will grow, pretty well in almost full shade. It gets slower to get going, but everything in the shade, is slower to get going. But some of the ones you might not have heard of are first one is pagoda dogwood. So it's not it is a cornice, but it's not. It looks different. It's more of a flowering dogwood, right? Other than compared to like the green and white. You know the
you're like ivory halo,
right? Or
even just the red.
I know, right? Osier dogwood.
Osier,
Sorry, there you go. We both were like forgetting the name of it. So, but the benefit, I mean, I love the pagoda in that it's got a really cool shape to it. It flowers. It does get wide and kind of layered, so it gets into a kind of a funky shape. Like it's a tree, but it kind of grows as a large, kind of interesting shrub.
Yeah.
Flowers, later in the season, kind of in a nice time, not super late, but not super early. And then it does get these little interesting pods. I guess you would call them berries, but they're pods. But the birds love them, so it's a great bird nature tree. It is native.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right? So it's a really good choice. So that I look at that if you've got a space. Now this is for something, this is a bigger space. This is going to get to be 6 feet, 8 feet wide eventually, and as tall as you'll let it go. But sometimes people have that. I'm just finishing a design. In fact, my phone was zinging because the contractor was sending me the finished pictures where we were kind of naturalizing the edge. The client was backing onto conservation, and she really wanted to bring more conservation closer to the house kind of thing. And so, all along the fringe, normally we're beating that back and putting in something, right? But this time we were adding, pagoda dogwoods and service berries and things and trying to bring nature closer.
Beautiful.
So it's really, so I'll post some pictures on social media.
Choice.
So you'll see some of the young pagoda dogwoods. And some of the other ones, I know the bottle brush. Oh my gosh, it went out of my head. Buckeye.
Oh,
there you go. So that one has, so I haven't used, this is the first time using it. I've seen it in garden tours in dense shade, and it's really a cool plant. Like have you seen it? It's kind of really got a neat, huge leaf to it. Yeah. It's really funky.
It is.
And the heads, the flowers, when they bloom, it almost reminds me of like oak leaf hydrangeas. They're kind of bigger, kind of conical, and so I don't know a lot about it, but I do know it's native, and I know it'll grow in the shade, and it has a presence. Because that's sometimes some of the problem with the shade plants is you barely notice them.
Yes.
Especially when it's a shrub, or it takes a while to get established. But these ones kind of had a presence, so I had 3 put in this garden as well. So so I'm really looking forward to getting those established.
Very nice. That sounds like a fantastic project.
Yeah, it was.
I love that they're building back in from the ravine.
For sure. It's definitely rare. Yeah. So, so what other plants do you like for the shade? Shrubs for the shade.
Well, I found one at the garden center a couple of years ago. The Kodiak series of honeysuckle. So they're a summer blooming shrub. They tend to be more yellows and some oranges, but the Kodiak series, there's Kodiak black, orange. Kodiak black, orange, and I think red. But they have varying degrees of orange, black, and like red or burgundy foliage. And then usually about June, end of June, beginning of July, they'll get the little yellow clusters that will fill them on themselves on the tops of around the shrub. They usually get about 2 to 3 feet tall and wide, maybe a little bit taller, like 3.5 type thing. But they're new, they're interesting, they're different. Okay. Again, just kind of adding some color, a different color. Like yellow is that kind of that universal garden color for every season, and then everyone loves that nice dark burgundy foliage that can pop something off. So, so that was an interesting one.
Excellent. The dogwoods, whether it's the red osier, the big one, or ivory halo dogwood. I've had some, and serviceberry, that's always a popular one. It's native. It'll grow from full sun to full shade. You can get it as a tree as well as multi-stemmed, small to large shrub, that type of thing. So that's a nice, a lot of the native stuff definitely will grow, like hemlocks as far as an evergreen goes. That's our one evergreen that will grow in the shade. Yews will also grow in the shade. Yews and boxwoods. I think you've got them down here too. But something that's got a bit of height and substance, definitely hemlock is the way to go. And we put quite a few of those in this property too. So
Nice.
yeah. And I've never used, have you any experience with cornelian cherry?
No.
Yeah, me either. But a fellow designer, shout out to Melanie, who's on the show, our pool designer. She loves it, and she says it's wonderful. So it's another native that is a really super hardy. She put some in containers this year in shady spots in her garden to kind of try and see if they'll overwinter. So that's a cool thing. So cornelian cherry is another option, and we love anything that's going to flower and fruit and have fall color. That's just the biggest bang. And that's pagoda too. It has that, flower in the spring, interesting pod/berries for the birds for the summer, and then a really nice fall color too. So you can have interesting color in a shade garden, and it's a good thing to prepare something like the pagoda. I think if you've got large mature trees that are casting a ton of shade, and you're thinking, in a year or two you might get rid of the trees, but you want to get something planted there now, then that's something, think about planting a serviceberry and planting a pagoda and kind of get them started, because they'll be fine in the shade. And then if that tree does come down, they're still going to be fine.
Yeah.
They're going to adapt to the sun. So that's a good little quick tip.
That is an excellent tip.
Yeah. So, and white snowberry, and that's another one that I always found interesting. I haven't used it a ton myself, but I always see it at the garden center.
Yes.
And because you don't see the berries until the fall. So it's a pretty indescript kind of plant, isn't it? All year long, you don't really notice it. And then in the fall, at the winter, at the garden center, you're like, oh, what's that? It's got little white berries all over it. And they're very white. So it's kind of cool. So that's something, if you're forward thinking and planning for all seasons, then that's something to think about for a great fall additive. Like the toad lily, pick up a couple of plants that look cool in the fall in your shade garden.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, I can't believe how fast an hour goes. And I know I say it, I'm broken record, right? Everybody, I say it every week, but we want to thank you so much. Oh my goodness.
Exactly. Thank you everyone for tuning in and writing in your questions. I usually have. You know what? I didn't write my list. I usually write everybody's name down.
Oh,
and
right.
thank
You
them
do.
all.
Yes. Normally, thank you everybody who wrote in tonight.
Sean, Mike.
Yes, for sure. Ray.
Yes. Ray. Pedro.
Excellent. We were going to come up with everybody.
I'm sorry if I forgot someone.
Yeah. But thank you for writing in, and thank you for listening always. If you have any other further questions, you can write us at instudio101@gmail.com, or me directly at joanne@down2earth.ca without the number 2, or Matt, they can email you directly at
Matthew at naturalaffinitydesigns.ca.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. And we're looking forward to next week. It's already the last Monday of the month.
I don't believe that.
So what are we talking about?
July in the garden.
We are. We're talking about what to do in your July garden. So thank you, everybody, for once again joining us here on Reality Radio 101 Down the Garden Path. Good night.
Night.
Thank you for listening to Down the Garden Path with your hosts, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101.